Welcome to our community meeting, everyone. Today is July 19th, 2022. Really happy that everyone's decided to come and join us today. I think we've got some really good content. We have a couple of presenters and a few announcements. We're going to have a grand old time today, I think. So welcome. Thanks for coming. Thank you for that. We have a couple of announcements, and one of them is the community meeting survey. We'd really like to learn a little bit more about what it is that adds value to these meetings, which is not to say that in and of themselves they aren't valuable because we're all coming together, but we'd just like to get some solid data about why it is that, or what it is that you would like to see in these meetings that would make you keep coming back. Of course, the obligatory plug for saving the date for OpenSearch Con. September 21st, 2022 in the beautiful Fremont studios. Register when you can, and I'll say it again. Anyone is welcome, regardless of technical expertise or perceived or actual experience. It's going to be a good time. And this is our community meeting. I did actually skip one survey. I believe we are still running the ingestion survey. We're still curious about how people are using various ingestion tools. That would be another helpful piece of data for us. So we do have some presenters today. We have Anurag Gupta from Calyptia giving a lab demo of FluentBit and OpenSearch. And then two more after that. I'll save the I'll announce them as they come along. But why don't I hand it over to Anurag, and we'll watch a demo of using FluentBit and OpenSearch.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Let me go ahead and take over the screen share here. So one of the pieces of, hey everyone, my name is Anurag, one of the co-founders of Calyptia and OpenSearch enthusiast as well. And today I want to talk a little bit about this lab environment that we've created. I'll share the links afterwards. Fingers crossed, don't run into any demo demons here. But I wanted to first go over a little bit of some motivation about what this lab environment is and why did we create it. So we've been a project that's been part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation for a many number of years. And as part of that, we've been able to host co-located events next to KubeCon. So if you've heard of Kubernetes conference, we've had conferences for FluentBit, FluentD as part of that. And one of the great parts of that, besides OpenSearch sponsoring it this year in Europe, was a lot of feedback from the community about what type of content folks like to see. And something that always gets rated all the way at the top very highly are hands-on workshops, labs, and we try to say, hey, how can we go tackle that from a community perspective and make that super simple for everyone to go out, run, and try. And so we've had Git repos, we've had all sorts of various methods, and now we're trying what you'll see here, which is an interactive, web-based, no infrastructure needed type of lab. So we've been running this with FluentBit for about a couple months, got a lot of great feedback about how that's working, some of the use cases, and now I wanted to actually do the first end-to-end where we have FluentBit and a backend platform, so you can kind of see the full use case altogether. So here, I'll share the link again afterwards. No infrastructure, but it's a very simple lab to kind of help you get started with FluentBit and OpenSearch. So I'm going to go ahead and launch, and I'll go ahead and click Start. And so what you'll find here is this environment has been pre-configured for you. It's actually running Kubernetes under the hood, and within this Kubernetes, we have OpenSearch dashboards, and FluentBit. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and first deploy and set up the environment. So I've gone ahead and just created a small shell script, which I'll walk through, and it uses the same Helm charts that OpenSearch dashboard have, and we're going to go ahead and deploy all of this. Now, this is going to take about 2 to 3 minutes. So while that's baking here live, what we'll go ahead and do is, hey, what did I do in the back end? So in the back end, what I ended up doing was we take all of the good stuff that the OpenSearch community has been pushing out. And actually, with Fluent Bit, we do regular integration tests with OpenSearch. And we took kind of those two worlds together and said, all right, let's take what we're doing for CI/CD every day, repurpose it for lab environments, and take all the artifacts and pieces that exist within the OpenSearch community and how things are being deployed, and also bring that into this lab. So in this, what we're actually doing is we're taking the Helm charts that exist as part of OpenSearch for OpenSearch dashboards, and what we're doing is literally just deploying those into this cluster. We're doing a very simple deployment. So again, this is lab, try it out, make sure it works, see the use case, gain value from it, play around with it. But not, there's no need for this to have any production data or any data that's important whatsoever. In fact, after this lab is done, all that data is going to be wiped. So, what did I deploy? Something super simple. And then I also included a node port so that we can interact with everything via OpenSearch dashboards. So I'm going to go back to the terminal. Let's see how much we have left. About 100 seconds, so generally around like 2 minutes, 48. And so what we're going to do afterwards, after everything is loaded, is we're going to deploy Fluent Bit. And Fluent Bit is going to grab some dummy messages, create some random content, and then forward those on to OpenSearch so that we can go search and play around with that data. And so let's go ahead and look at the Fluent Bit configuration while we're still waiting here. So let's go here. Now the Fluent Bit configuration that I'm using, again, very, very simple. I'm using one of our input plugins that generates a dummy message. We could use input plugins that grab logs from the running Kubernetes environment. We could use an input plugin that grabs things like Nginx or Apache logs and uses some structured parsers to make that really useful so you can create really great dashboards. But at least for the purposes of the first iteration of this lab, wanted to keep it very simple. Let's just get data into OpenSearch and then start iterating on there. And I think that's also one of the call to actions I have for the community is in these labs are not just like, hey, we create it once and they're available. We really like to get feedback about like really hard use cases, things that we could find useful, things like multi-line, or hey, I want to see how XYZ could be done in a lab. And because this environment and what we're using is really flexible, it's not too crazy difficult for us to go and try to go and tackle some of these scenarios. So let's go back and see if we've hit that 3 minute mark. Yeah, we have. Awesome. So let's go ahead and refresh this. This goes ahead and it automatically loads up OpenSearch dashboards, again, in the same exact environment, so you're not having to switch around too many tabs. We're going to use our super secure username password there. Let's go ahead and log in. Excellent. Oh, got a breach, trying to save it. No worries. Going to click through. Okay. And then what we're going to do is deploy that Fluent Bit that I was talking about earlier. So similarly with OpenSearch, we're using the same exact, we're using one of the open Fluent. Fluent has its own Helm repo. We're going to use that. If you're not familiar with Helm, it's like a package manager for Kubernetes. And we're going to use the value file that we were just viewing earlier. So go ahead, great, deployed. And let's go ahead and switch into this. Let's create our index pattern. And there's instructions here on the right-hand side. So I know I'm kind of breezing through it, but no worries, you're always able to go back, read that, correct it. My grammar is not always the best. Let's just do this. Excellent, create the index pattern. Great. And we can come into discover and perfect. Okay, so we're sending data from this Fluent Bit instance. It's not doing anything super special. If you remember the configuration, we're just sending this dummy message saying message testing over. This is the same configuration we used for integration tests. And as part of that. Great, let's look at the record. Okay, awesome. We're getting the message tested. So again, just a very simple end-to-end workflow. I have Kubernetes. Whether you like it or not, you're going to deploy it with Helm, and so you become get to use that as well. And then with FluentBit, we'll deploy that with Helm and send data to that OpenSearch cluster that's running. Now, the other fun thing is, while this is very basic and kind of the easy left to right way of following the instructions will get you to this point, you can always come in here and start going crazy if you'd like. So if you want to go start looking at specific services, you want to go look at, okay, I want to try a particular type of log. I want to, I want to try this scenario. You're more than welcome to do it in this environment. So this is a fully featured. I mean, it's running OpenSearch, it's running OpenSearch dashboards, and it's running FluentBit. So the nice thing here is, if you want to start experimenting with it, it's fully available for you. One thing we found with FluentBit is in our sandbox environment is that a lot of folks like to play around with that environment and send data to external services as well. It's all available for you here. So again, first step, really looking forward to community feedback, building more labs. What do you want to see? And then kind of post that, we'll keep updating this and folks can keep trying it out. So with that, I'll go ahead and share the link in the chat. And then my last plug here is we've had FluentCon, which has again been sponsored by OpenSearch in the past. We've decided to up-level that a little bit and now have another co-located event with a Kubernetes conference. So if you're looking to add even more conferences later this year besides OpenSearchCon, we'll have an Open Observability Day in October 24th. So the CFP is open. So if you have a cool observability use case, definitely go ahead and submit that. That will be very well received and we'll greatly appreciate it. So yeah, that's a little bit of this lab end to end. I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat. And otherwise, I'll paste the lab below so you can try it out.
Awesome, Anurag. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course. Let's see. Let me post it here.
I do have a question. So why use Helm instead of just use it? By the way, David, developer advocate from AWS, should probably specify that. Why use Helm as opposed to like a single node? Is there any reason for clustering in this particular instance?
Very, very good question. So not necessarily. I tried actually first with some containers. I found some of the networking pieces with the lab environment were a little more difficult to set up. And some of the Docker containers had some certain requirements. So I said, why don't I just give a pretty big Kubernetes cluster to everyone and go with that? So that just was the easiest path to get end to end. If I had to revisit it, yeah, I'd probably go look at like very specific container instances of everything. So it's just, you don't even have to run the step. That kind of 3-minute step, it's not as appealing as I'd like it to be. But the bonus is, yeah, you get some exposure to Helm if you've never had it either.
Nice, awesome, thank you.
Well, fantastic. So did everyone get who had a question get to ask it? Anyone waiting on a question?
This is Ryan. I have a quick question. First of all, thanks, Anurag. That was great. I love the demo being available. Just in general, between Calyptia and OpenSearch community, I'm just wondering, is there still a high level of collaboration going on in terms of like, FluentBit and kind of integration with OpenSearch, especially with additional developments in OpenSearch or additional things being available in like the line protocol, et cetera?
Yeah, good question. There's been quite a few features that we've been working on together. So some to be announced. I think the big things are just maintaining CI/CD is definitely priority, making sure that we're good citizens there. So we have, for example, nightly builds with FluentBit and OpenSearch, so you can see how all of that's interacting. Again, the lab's based off of most of what we do for those tests. From a feature side, there's, with FluentBit, we've expanded into things like metrics as well as even traces. And so with 1.9.6, we do support OTLP over HTTP for both metrics and traces. And so we have very experimental trace support. So you can send your traces to FluentBit and fire them off to OpenSearch. It's mainly the main use case that we started with is actually for like large data block storage, which is what users were asking for is, hey, I just want to fire off all our traces there. Great, but actually it works for OpenSearch there too. There's a couple other things in the pipe that will be great to share here in the coming months too. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, thanks so much again for sharing your sandbox there. That's awesome. I think next we have a David Venable with the Data Prepper team.
Thank you for letting us demo Data Prepper today. I'm David Venable, and I have my colleague Asif here on the line. We are both software developers and maintainers on the Data Prepper project. First, I'll give you a little background on Data Prepper since not everyone's familiar with it. Data Prepper is a data collector for observability data. We support ingestion of traces, logs, and metric data, and send that data into OpenSearch. Data Prepper is part of the OpenSearch project, and it is an Apache 2.0 licensed project. Just a brief overview of the concepts of Data Prepper. Data Prepper has the idea of sources where you retrieve data. We have processors to perform transformations on that data. For example, there's a Grok processor which can extract meaningful fields out of a log line. And then finally, sinks where we send data to. Right now, OpenSearch is our primary sink. And you do this all through configuring Data Prepper so you don't have to write code. The maintainers, we added S3 as a source back in June in Data Prepper 1.5. So I want to tell you a little bit about that feature and demo that to you. So first of all, why did we add this feature? Well, primarily, there are a lot of AWS services that write their logs to S3. Here, we have a slide that shows a really common web setup, right? You often set up an application server, maybe it's running on EC2 or Kubernetes, whatever it is, and then you put some sort of load balancer in front of it. Well, a lot of AWS customers are going to use the application load balancer or a classic Elastic load balancer and put that in between the clients and your server. And that works great, but what it does also create access logs if you want, but those go into S3. And so it could be difficult to get those logs out. There are also other services that by default write their logs to S3. Here are just a listing of some of them that we aim to support. VPC flow logs, we know a lot of people like to get flow logs and look at those, CloudTrail, for example. But yeah, a lot of services are going to write their logs to S3. There's also another common scenario that we know a lot of teams have been doing. They'll actually sometimes create a sidecar like FluentBit next to their application server, and they'll configure that to send their logs directly to S3 rather than sending it to some other system. This is great in one sense because S3 is massively scalable and highly reliable, so you don't have to worry about the infrastructure on that end. But then you have this issue of actually getting data out. So right now, customers or users have a lot of issues getting this out. Sometimes they have to write their own code for parsing SQS or write their own Lambdas. In these cases, they're sometimes copying and pasting code from the internet. They're mixing it with their own custom code for processing. They have to write code to write it to OpenSearch. And so here we have a slide that shows the solution that Data Prepper is providing. We added this S3 source as a new source into Data Prepper. And the way it works is it pulls an SQS queue. So you can configure your S3 bucket, and it'll send notifications to SQS every time a new log is written. That'll hold in that queue, and the Data Prepper S3 source will pull that queue. So you just need to configure Data Prepper to read from that queue. You need to give Data Prepper the right permissions, and you need to configure your S3 bucket so that it's writing events. There's plenty of documentation on that on the internet and various AWS web pages. Once you do that, you have data prepper reading from a source, and then it's just a matter of configuring your sinks and your processors. So you could create a Grok processor that knows how to read the lines from an application load balancer, for example, and then you can send that all to OpenSearch. And so with this, you can do a lot of the work of getting your data out of S3, and you can do that all through configuration and running data prepper rather than having to write custom code for it. With that introduction, I'm going to hand it to Asif. He's going to run the demo. He'll describe the setup and show it to you running. Asif, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, David. Hey, I'm Asif, and I'm a maintainer of the data prepper repo. Let's see how the demo is set up. So we have a sample runner Python script which sends a sample HTTP request to the application load balancer, which is configured for the demo application. The application load balancer then sends the access logs to S3, where all the logs are written, and we configure the SQS queue to receive the S3 event notifications whenever an object is written to the S3 bucket. After that, we configure the data prepper pipeline to have a S3 source where it reads from the SQS queue, which we configured by giving the queue URL, and we have a couple of processors, the Grok processor and a date processor, to add the timestamp and the OpenSearch sync. Now let's see the demo in action. So this is the sample pipeline which we're going to use for the demo to configure the data prepper pipeline. So data prepper pipeline has three main components: source, processor, and sync, as David mentioned. So in this demo, we are using the S3 source, and we configure the notification type as SQS because all the notifications are coming from SQS right now, and ALB sends the logs to S3 in the compressed format. So we configure the compression type to gzip, and all the ALB logs are delimited by a new line. There is also one more codec called a JSON codec if the logs are in the JSON format, and you define the SQS configuration options such as queue URL and other configurations related to the SQS. And we define the AWS configuration options where you define the region and the credentials. You can use the STS role on if you have any roles for any federated users. Right now for this demo, we have the credentials set up as a local environment variables. And we have an on error option to either retain the messages which data prepper failed to read from SQS or delete the messages. So the retain messages lets the DLQ of SQS handle the messages which have failed. And then we have a Grok processor which extracts different fields from the ALB logs such as timestamp, client, target, and request processing time. It's a very long string to extract all the fields. And we have a date processor which has a default timestamp when the event is received to the data prepper. And then there's a simple setup of OpenSearch sync. So for this demo, we have the OpenSearch sync already running in the background. So let's just start the data prepper Docker image by specifying the pipelines.yaml and giving the path for the AWS credentials. Data prepper will take a couple of seconds to start. Let's just, so you can see that we're creating the SV client and SQS client, and you can see the data prepper running at port 4900. Now we have a sample runner which sends the logs to S3 bucket. So let's start that Python script. And you can see already it's sending the HTTP request. So now let's just go to the S3 console and see if we are receiving any logs over there. So the directory structure here is structured for the date. So you can see today is 19th of July, and there are a lot of objects already written to this. So let's go to the, so we have a sample script which creates the visualization dashboard and the index pattern for the OpenSearch. So once we created these two, we can just go to the OpenSearch dashboards and check if we are receiving any logs. Once we reload this, we should be able to see the index pattern which we created through the script. We can see the TLB logs, and then go to the Discover, and you can see the data came in the last 15 minutes. If you see the data and scroll down, you can see the actual log from the logs which the LP sent, and then the Grok processor extracted all the different fields from the logs like key, received, bytes, and the request. And we can also see the bucket ID from which S3 bucket the logs are actually coming from. And we created a visualization from the script. So if you go to the Visualize tab, you can see this is the simple pie chart which shows all the HTTP response codes, like 200, 404, 400, and 405 in a simple pie chart. Yeah, that's it for the demo.
Yeah, thanks, Asif. So I did also want to clarify that right now in Data Prepper, we support reading both new line delimited files, such as the ALB produces, and we also support reading files that produce JSON, where you have a JSON array of objects. It can support gzip or unencrypted data. If you have logs in S3 and want to, I would encourage you to give Data Prepper and the S3 source a try. We would love to hear any feedback. If you have any other use cases you're interested in, please let us know. We have some links here at the bottom, and we can probably add those into the chat as well. But we're very happy to hear feedback on this feature and would love to know what you think about it. And I'm also happy to take questions. We could take them now, or I'm going to hang on to the end of the community meeting, so I'm available to answer questions then too. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Nate.
Well, thanks. I could probably fire off a question here real quick. We do have one third presenter today. I believe Heather Halter is here to point us to a survey and get some input on a redesign. But and I'm curious, the mapping of the indices that hold all of those SQS messages. You mentioned the Grok processor, and if I understand correctly, the Grok processor is basically just a regular expression that's applied to the message. So all of that extra data that was actually extrapolated from just the message line, like how much of that data came directly from SQS and how much of that was extrapolated?
Yeah, I can try to answer that question if I understand. So just to clarify on the Grok processor, it is a lot like a regex processor. One difference is it has named regexes. So if we were to look at the config, some of them might be named like IP address. And so you don't have to write the regex pattern for an IP. So it has that predefined. That Grok processor is actually being applied against the data that comes out of the S3 object. So the metadata from SQS isn't really propagated downward. It's only used within the S3 source. The metadata we do add, though, is the S3 bucket and the key. And I think those can be useful because I don't think the logs actually indicate, for example, what application load balancer is being used, but the key path does have that. And so there is some metadata you could get out of there if you wanted to as well. We didn't demo that, but it is possible.
Interesting.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
Kind of a tangential question. So it seemed like SQS has to be set up to be receiving those notifications when things are added to S3. If someone has a set of buckets already filled up, is there a way to, like a path forward for them to get those notifications so that it can be processed?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have talked to some people that are very interested in that concept. Right now, Data Prepper doesn't support that. There is a workaround where you could do an S3 copy on that. So you could do an S3 copy maybe to that, but from one bucket to another, or even within the same bucket. and that would create new notifications. But something that we probably will look into at some point in the future is just having an ability to scan an S3 bucket and find objects from a certain key path as configured by users.
Cool. Thank you.
You know, almost kind of like a drop folder. You just drop it in the inbox and it'll sort through them later.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I think I'm going to hand it over to Heather.
This is Heather. I'm the doc manager at OpenSearch. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the documentation today. So just a little bit about me and the team. So I've been here at Amazon for about 3 months. And the rest of the team, I mean, you know, OpenSearch is about a year old. The team is about 6 months old. We started in January with 1 full-time writer, and now we have 6 full-time writers. So we're really growing the team, and we're really trying to fill the gaps in the documentation. We know we have a long way to go, but we have a really talented team. We also have an editor on board, so also focusing on the quality of the content that we produce. Some of the things we're currently working on, things like installation is a primary goal of ours. Dashboards, we know we don't have a lot of content on dashboards. APIs, lacking there. Clients, security. We just put out field types documentation. So we're really trying to ramp up our documentation content. Our team is fairly new, but we think we can produce a lot of content this year for everybody. Another thing that we are doing is we want to improve the overall documentation platform look and feel. We want to make it more usable. We currently use this is a Jekyll template. It's very flat. We know we have a search, but still maybe hard to find things here. So I don't have a survey, but I would like your feedback on things that you would like to see in our documentation. You know, we will work on the TOC. We'll make things easier to find in terms of chunking. The layout will improve. We want to add some feedback sentiment in there, so maybe some opportunities to provide feedback in the content itself. And that's really just kicking off. So I don't have anything to show you because we're just kind of in the early stages of trying to get feedback on kind of what you'd like to see. I can open it up to feedback at this point, or I don't know, you can send it to me, put in an issue. I recognize a lot of people on the call from the documentation repo. So I know people have been submitting PRs and issues. So that's great. Keep doing that. And we're really trying to prioritize on those.
And we put a link in the chat for an issue that Heather has open right now. So feel free to go out and comment on that as well.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I have to echo Lucas's sentiment about being excited that our docs team is being built out. And I've noticed that when the issues get filed in GitHub, the response time is very quick. So I wanted to throw a high five your way, because it's going very smoothly, if you ask me.
Thanks. We're trying to triage all of the issues. Yeah, there were some that were quite a bit old, but we've been able to do those a little bit faster. So thanks.
There may be a question that I have is, what is kind of the best way to provide feedback, right? There's a lot of complicated things in OpenSearch. Is it, are you looking for feedback on structure, content gaps? Like what sort of feedback would you kind of prefer to see top of mind?
I mean, content gaps are always a good thing. We did put a post in the community forum about a month ago requesting, what are the gaps? What are you looking for? What are we missing? At this point, we'll even take input on look and feel or functionality of the doc site, because as I said, we're still in the early stages. So so anything's game at this point. We we need to start designing it out. We have a good I think content structure, information architecture in mind, but even that's up to debate. And I will actually put an outline in that issue that is posted here, and then it'd be great to get some feedback on that outline, if you think that makes sense or doesn't make sense, or if you still see that there's anything missing. But we did run a pretty thorough documentation audit, so we think we know what the gaps are, but it's not a perfect process. So we're always looking for more feedback on that.
Yeah, I think what I've done in the past is to file an issue in the documentation website repo saying, here's a documentation request. That's worked pretty well for me in the past. Is that how you would prefer them in the future, Heather?
I mean, yeah, everything that we do, we have an issue for. So yeah, that's a great way. Some people put PRs in, and we take those too. Sometimes we have to rework them a little bit or get that DCO sign off sometimes, but that's okay too. But an issue is usually better because you can actually describe it out a little bit more, and link to certain resources, and so either way. But yeah, probably an issue is preferred.
Anyone can submit those, right? Like doesn't matter who you are. If you see something that's missing or you feel like something is incorrect, file that issue.
Yeah, it's totally open. And there's a link to do that on our documentation website.
Well, if no one has any questions for Heather, or feel free to drop them in the chat. We have run out of presenters. So I think it's time for some open Q&A. If anyone has anything for the good of the order that they'd like to bring up and talk about, now would be a wonderful time.
This is Ryan again. I started a kind of a chat in the chat asking about, I guess, from data prepper team or OpenSearch team, or even folks from Fluent, et cetera, if there's been any additional discussion for stuff I know I asked way too much about in the past, like for DLQ and stuff like that, to help either from a client side perspective in terms of where trying to push a messages in bulk and there may be some errors inside of the payload, or if there's been any discussion on the OpenSearch side of what to do upon, again, a bulk insert, and if there's any type of issues there.
Yeah, this is David Venable from Data Prepper. I can try to answer that a little bit from the Data Prepper's perspective. So this is something we definitely think is important and are going to try to put some effort towards. Right now, what Data Prepper does is when it makes a bulk request, it finds the messages that failed and then we'll retry those ones. And at some point, it kind of records the fact that they failed on the local disk, but there's no real playback mechanism. And so something we are going to try to look into is improving this so that Data Prepper can have some ability to possibly replay failed messages in the future. Or if we can't replay them, be able to save them off somewhere so they could perhaps be examined to see what's wrong with the message. But we don't currently have that in.
Sure. Has there been any thought in maybe talking to more the core OpenSearch team in regards to handling that actually on the OpenSearch side upon ingestion and being able to divert messages with issues or even particular issues to maybe to say specific indexes? I mean, that doing something like that, by the way, would help obviously more than just Data Prepper, right? There's a whole bunch of different different clients to the user push data. I'm wondering if there's any kind of thought that might be a useful feature, so that as more and more clients would interact with OpenSearch, that they all have that capability.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is maybe OpenSearch itself could have its own built-in DLQ in a sense. Like at some point we say, hey, we can't save these, and then we send it to a special index that is less likely to fail due to errors with the mappings, for example. I think that's an interesting idea. I've not talked to the core team about that, but I will make a note to do that as part of our research into this.
I'll just highlight, I would think that would be a great feature. It would help. It would help a lot from, again, a multi-client perspective, especially in, very high transaction situations where you want to keep the clients relatively lightweight. The only thing that hopefully the client would have to know is, like, do I have a successful message from a bulk perspective? Did it handle the bulk operation? Yes or no, right? Which is part of the line protocol. But then anything that is kind of, individual message problematic, that OpenSearch in itself has a methodology to handle those.
If I could chime in, also Charlotte just dropped in, feel free to open an issue on the OpenSearch repo, which I second. Just from a little bit of my experience, I think it makes sense to not necessarily handle those, because what you could end up with really quickly is just this huge backlog of, jarbled different types of messages that didn't make it through. And that's something that someone could tuck under the rug and just pretend doesn't exist for a long time, just because I know I've seen other teams do things like that. So when you kind of send it back, you're forcing the user to handle that themselves, whether that is through, maybe it would be helpful on the data prepper side then to have like a local disk and then a playback mechanism. Generally, because there's probably something wrong with those messages that needs to be handled in a particular way. So I definitely like the idea of having a mechanism, though, so that it's easier to replay those.
I would be perfectly happy having them on client side. I think if the libraries were better built to handle those situations, which the general libraries for clients are not, right?
That's fair, yeah.
And as such, very few clients do anything like that. The only ones I know of are either Logstash or Fluent D. With the Fluent D, with the recent OpenSearch updates, by the way. But other clients, I'm not aware of anyone else who has that capability.
That's fair, yeah.
Okay, well, are there any other things? Does that get you going, Ryan? Is that?
I'm no better off than I was before, but
yeah. Well, at least we got the issue out into the air, and
and again, I just wonder. I don't know who else might be running across those type of things, et cetera, or if anyone else, on the calls, maybe run into similar type of issues that necessitates some solutions to that effect.
Yeah, well, I know in my experience in the streaming media world in a past life. Usually when jobs fail, there's something about the data, like particularly, video transcoding. If something fails, there's usually something bad with the source data. And so that usually means someone has to go back through and mess with the source data before it can even be played again. So those queues end up just being a very long lineup, as David articulated much better than I.
I don't know if I'd say that, but
okay. Well, if there's no other open questions, or if anyone's typing them into chat, feel free to type away. Otherwise, in the meantime, I wanted to bring up that this is the last of the weekly community meetings, and that we are switching to every 2 weeks. So our next meeting will be August 12th. So I believe there is still a meeting on meetup.com for the 26th. That one will not be taking place. Our next meeting will be August 12th. We'll be talking about the Windows distro for OpenSearch and the Kotlin client for OpenSearch. I hope I have pronounced that properly.
Quick comment, August 2nd.
Did I say a different?
You said 12th. Just want to make sure we don't have people showing up on the 12th.
Yeah, my humble apologies.
It's all good.
August 2nd.
That's fair.
All right. Well, it sounds like everybody's simmering down a little bit. So I'm going to hang out for a little bit longer, just in case someone remembers a question they were going to ask earlier. Otherwise, I think we can call it.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, I appreciate all the interaction today. That was it was great. And thank you to our presenters as well.